The Legacy Superhero Season 1, Episode 3, A Hero Emerges. After my conversation with TW, I took a long nap because I was still exhausted from my fight with the Injectors. But I didn't sleep nearly as well as I should have, because my mind was aflame with curiosity over the news and information TW had shared with me. First off, Grandfather was still alive. For 10 years, my parents and I had been wondering whether we would ever see him again. Now, I knew for a fact that he was still alive. I didn't know where he was or how well he was doing, but just knowing that he was somewhere in this world made me feel much better than I had in a long time. Now, I wondered who these icon people were. TW's explanation of them didn't help. Whoever they were and whatever they were trying to do, they probably weren't good people. I mean, they kidnapped Grandfather and held him prisoner for the last 10 years. That's not the behavior of good guys. It's the behavior of bad guys who are probably planning something evil. Still, there was nothing I could do about Icon or Grandfather at the moment. Wherever he was, Grandfather was probably going to be okay for now, because Grandfather was a tough guy who could take care of himself. Besides, it didn't sound like Icon was trying to kill or torture him, so I didn't have any reason to rush to his rescue right away. What I really needed to focus on was defeating the Injectors. With the powers of Tricksot under my belt, or rather on my wrist, I suddenly had the chance to do what I always dreamed of doing. There was still a lot I didn't know about my new powers and abilities, of course, but if my fight with the Injectors went as well as my fight with those Injectors in the backyard of that house, then pretty soon Rumsfeld wouldn't have an Injector problem anymore. Of course, there was still the problem of being an illegal superhero. I had never taken the superhero exam before, much less passed it. Using superpowers without a valid superhero license could get you arrested. In some states, you could even be executed for it. Granted, that was mostly because anyone using superpowers with a license likely got them from power, but somehow I doubted that the federal government would believe me if I told them that my powers came from my costume, rather than from an illegal injection of power. But I would worry about the details later. For now, I would use every opportunity I could find to practice and refine my skills. I doubted I would need to spend much time practicing, however. After all, I'd already defeated a whole team of Injectors on my own. With just a few more days of practice, I would probably be strong enough to take down the entire organization all by myself. How long I slept, I didn't know, but it must have been a few hours at least, because I didn't wake up right away even when I heard Mom knocking loudly on the door to my room. A quick glance at the watch showed me that yes, I had been asleep for a few hours. It was just after lunch, which explained why I felt so groggy. "Jack," Mom shouted, her voice jarringly loud despite being on the other side of the door. "Are you awake? There's someone who would like to meet you." I blinked several times and, yawning, raised my head and said, "Who is it?" "A detective from the police," said Mom. "She's really rather young for her job, but she's got the badge and everything. She wants to talk to you about your incident with the Injectors earlier, because she's filing a detailed report." I frowned. It seemed strange to me that the police would send a detective to interview me when I had already told them everything I knew, and it was even stranger that they would do it so soon after I got home. Maybe there was a detail or two they needed clarification on. In any case, I sat up and shouted, "Okay, Mom, I'll be right there. Just let me put my shoes on." I hopped off my bed and pulled on my shoes. As I tied the laces, I glanced at the Trickshot watch on my wrist. I had not taken it off when I took a nap earlier. It was so light that I couldn't even feel it, but for some reason I didn't think it would be wise to take my watch downstairs with me this time. So I removed the watch from my wrist and tossed it in the top drawer of my dresser, pulling one of my old plain t-shirts over it quickly to make sure it was hidden. Then I left the room and made my way downstairs to the kitchen, where I heard voices speaking. I recognized Mom's voice, as well as Dad's voice, but I didn't recognize the third voice, which sounded like a young 20-something woman. It must be the detective, though she sounded more like a college student than a detective. Entering the kitchen, I saw Mom and Dad sitting around the kitchen table. Mom, as usual, wore her favorite green dress, while Dad was still in his dirty construction jacket and jeans. Dad and I looked very similar to each other, the only difference being that I was taller and thinner than him. Dad's years of construction work had left him with hard, tan skin and a very stout body that was much stronger than it looked. His construction hat sat on the table in front of him, while he held a beer in his other hand that he had obviously just opened, based on how full it was. Sitting across from Mom and Dad was a young woman I had never seen before in my life. She was very short and petite, to the point where I would have mistaken her for one of my classmates if I didn't know that she was an adult. She wore a simple business suit that made her look very official, though it also looked awkward on her, as if she didn't usually wear suits. Her blonde hair was straight and clean, almost sparkling, it was so clean. Dad was the first one to notice me. His hard eyes glanced in my direction and he smiled, crinkling the skin around his eyes. "Hey, Jack, how are you feeling?" "I got back from work as fast as I could when I heard about those damned injectors who tried to kill you." "I'm fine, Dad," I said, smiling back. "I didn't get hurt. Just really scared, but I'm going to be all right, I think." "I still can't believe that happened," said Dad, shaking his head. "Getting attacked by the injectors of all people, boy. If I had been there, I would have sent every last one of those monsters to the hospital." I couldn't help but smile even more. Dad may not have been a superhero like Grandfather, but he had the strongest sense of justice of anyone I knew and was incredibly protective of Mom and me. It was nice to know that he managed to get off work to come back home and make sure I was okay. It made today seem better than it was. "If you're done bragging about how you would beat up a bunch of drug dealers with guns, then maybe you can introduce me to your son," said the young woman, leaning back in her chair and looking over at me. "Unless you just want to sit around and waste time talking, that is." Maybe it wasn't entirely fair, but I immediately disliked this lady. Based on the way Mom and Dad looked at each other, I could tell that they didn't like her any more than I did. But I didn't say that aloud. I just waved at her and said, in a polite voice, I can introduce myself. "I'm Jack McDonald. You are?" "Detective Christina Madison," said the woman. She pulled out a police badge and flashed it at me. "I work for the City of Rumsfeld Police Department. It's my job to follow up on cases involving the injectors and other drug dealers." "That seems like a kind of specific title for a small city police department," I said, tilting my head to the side. "There is a lot of drug dealing out here," said Christina. "Especially from the injectors. You'd never guess, given how idyllic this place seems, but I guess every city has its dark side." "Eh?" "I take it you're not from around here," I said. "Yeah," said Christina, nodding. "I'm from New York City. Moved out here because it's cheaper, and it's the only place I could find a job. Otherwise, I'd be back in Nike where I'd have to deal with less drugs than you find out here." I bit my lower lip. I couldn't tell if Christina was trying to provoke me into responding to her negatively, or if this was just her personality. I would have responded in kind, but I could tell that Mom and Dad wouldn't like that, so I decided to take a more diplomatic approach. Taking a seat at the table next to Mom, I said, "So you're here to ask me more questions about the attack?" "Right," said Christina. "More specifically, I'd like to ask you about the unidentified individual who saved you." "I already told the police what happened," I said. "I didn't see the guy who saved me because I was hiding in that tool shed. The shed didn't have any windows and the door was closed, so I couldn't see anything. All I heard was the sounds of the injectors fighting the guy. I don't even know what his name is." And Christina rested her chin on her hand, looking at me with penetrating eyes. "Yes, I'm aware of what you told the police, but I'm just trying to make sure you didn't leave out any details accidentally. I have a talent for helping people remember things they forgot in the heat of the moment. It's why I'm so good at what I do." Humility was definitely not one of her defining character traits, but I said, "Well, I'm not sure how your talent will help me, because if I didn't see anything, how could I forget it?" "The human mind has an interesting way of remembering the strangest things, but putting that memory out of normal reach," said Christina. She pulled out her phone and began tapping the screen. "I have a picture which might jog your memory. It was taken by one of the neighbors of the house you were at. It's not very good, because the neighbor in question was trying to avoid drawing the attention of the injectors, but it should be clear enough for our purposes. Ah, here it is." Christina turned her phone toward me. My parents and I leaned forward to get a better look at the picture, but as soon as I saw it, my palms became sweaty, and I wished that I was anywhere else right now. The picture showed me, in my trickshot costume, talking on the phone to Jones, and the door to the shed was open, revealing that I wasn't in there at all. I would have jumped up and run away just then, but I knew that that would just make me look guilty. Instead, I looked up at Christina and said, "Who is that?" "The man who defeated the injectors who were trying to kill you, presumably," said Christina, putting the phone on the table. "According to the witness I spoke to, after he defeated the injectors, he was seen speaking on the phone that belonged to one of the injectors, though we don't know where he went after that, because the witness went back into her house after that to call the police and inform them of the injector attack. When she came back out to see if he was still there, he was gone and the tool shed's door was closed." This seemed like an absurd amount of investigation for a detective from a small-town police department, especially in such a short amount of time. Maybe Christina really was as good as she said she was. If so, then I would have to tread very carefully around her in order to avoid revealing that Trickshot and I were the same person. But I don't get the guy's getup, said Dad before I could respond. He gestured at the picture on the phone. I recognize that costume. That's my dad's trick shot costume back when he was a superhero. Are you sure about that? Said Christina, shifting her attention from me to Dad. Yeah, said Dad, nodding. I saw my dad put on that costume for work every day for 18 years. It's been a long time since I last saw it, but there's no way I would ever forget that cape or those goggles. I just don't understand where this guy could have gotten the costume from, though, because it disappeared with my dad 10 years ago. That's a mystery for another time, I think, said Christina. She looked at me again. The more important question is, where were you when the door to that tool shed was open? By your own account, you hid inside the tool shed for the entirety of the encounter. You didn't emerge until long after the fight was over, by which time the police had arrived and started arresting Injectors. Can you explain why you are not in this picture, and why you did not see this man, despite the fact that he was standing in the middle of the backyard with nothing to obstruct him? I was sweating something fierce now, like how I did after a hard workout. I didn't know how to answer in a way that would avoid arousing Christina's suspicions. Or to my parents, for that matter. I was just glad that I had chosen to leave the trick shot watch in my room before I came down, because if I hadn't, the gig likely would have been up the second I entered the kitchen. Thinking fast, I said, well, I'll admit that my memory from that time is kind of fuzzy, because I was so scared and terrified. I hid behind the wheelbarrow inside the shed, which as you can see was turned on its side. That's why you can't see me there. What about the open door? Said Christina. Can you explain that? Christina had an incredibly intense stare, like she was looking directly into my soul. I was glad I kept my hands on my lap under the table, otherwise she would have seen them sweating and realized that something was up. One of the Injectors did manage to open the door before that guy arrived, I said. Yes, I remember that now. Rodriguez, that was the Injector's name, ripped open the door, but before they could shoot me, that guy appeared and defeated them. I didn't see it, however, because I was too busy hiding behind the overturned wheelbarrow to risk looking at the fight. And when did you close the door? Christina questioned. Because the door was closed when the first officers arrived upon the scene. I didn't, I admitted. I think it was probably the guy in the trick shot costume. Maybe he wanted to make sure I was safe, or maybe he didn't know I was in there, and just thought the door didn't need to remain open. I just remember the door being closed from the outside. I take it, then, that you don't know the man wearing the trick shot costume, said Christina. I nodded. Yeah, don't recognize the guy at all. He's probably not my grandfather, though. He looks too young. It was meant to be a joke, but it came out kind of pathetic due to my nerves. Christina didn't look amused. She picked up her phone and put it back in the coat of her jacket before looking at me again. Well, you've answered all of my questions, I think. I'm going to write this all up in a report when I get back to HQ. Wait, you're leaving already? I said in surprise. You're not going to ask me more questions? Christina stood up. What else is there to ask? You already answered all of the ones I had, as well as a few new ones that I came up with during the questioning. I'm a rather busy woman, in case you can't tell, so I don't have time to spend talking to teenage boys like you all day. That would have offended me normally, but I was so relieved that I had somehow managed to stumble my way through the questioning process without revealing my secret identity that I was more relieved than anything. Okay, makes sense. Mr. and Mrs. McDonald, said Christina, looking at my parents. I wanted to thank you for allowing me to come into your house and speak to your son about this issue. With this information, the Rumsfeld City Police Department is that much closer to making the city of Rumsfeld a safer place for everyone. You're welcome, Detective, said Dad, who seemed taken aback by Christina's sudden change in attitude. He halfway rose from his chair. Do you want me to get the door for you, or? Don't worry, said Christina cheerfully. I might be a crazy big city gal, but I think I know how doors work. Thanks for the offer, though. With that, Christina walked out of the kitchen. A second later, I heard the front door open and close, and then the sound of a car engine starting up and driving away down the street, until it was out of hearing range. Well, Mom looked at me and Dad, mystified. That woman was certainly different. That's a nice way of describing her, said Dad with a grunt. She obviously thinks we're just a bunch of hicks from flyover country. I don't know why those idiots in the police department hired her if she's just going to talk down to us like that. Maybe she's just stressed from moving from such a big city like New York to such a small one like this, said Mom, though she spoke rather half-heartedly. Moving is always stressful, especially when you're by yourself. Nah, I think she's just stuck up, said Dad, shaking his head. I bet she won't last 1 month here. Then she'll go crawling back to NYC where her kind belongs." Dad chuckled when he said that, while Mom frowned her disapproval but, as usual, said nothing about Dad's crude jokes. Me? I said nothing, because I was still thinking about how lucky I had gotten. If the conversation had gone even slightly differently, my secret identity would have been blown before my superhero career even started. I made a mental note to avoid Christina if I ever saw her around town. She acted like she was satisfied with my answers, but deep down, I suspected that she didn't believe them entirely and would be keeping a close eye on me from now on. I was snapped out of my thoughts when Dad slapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, sport, how are you doing? You're sweating like an elephant." "What?" I said, looking at Dad. "Oh, I'm all right. Christina was just a really intense lady." "You can say that again," said Dad. "Anyway, let's stop talking about stuck-up women from big cities. I'm just glad to see that you're all right and that those injector idiots are going to rot in jail for the rest of their lives. So long as you're safe, I don't care who they have working for the police." "Thanks, Dad," I said. Can I go back to my room now? I'm still kind of tired and I'd also like to take a shower." "Wait a minute, Jack," said Dad. "Today's your birthday, remember? I got you a gift. I planned to give it to you when I got off work later, but now that we're both here, I might as well give it to you now." Dad pulled a small box out from under the table and gave it to me. The box was about the size of a smartphone but slightly bigger. Written on the top were the words, "Happy Birthday, Jack from Dad." "What is it?" I said, looking up at Dad. "Open it and find out," said Dad. Wondering what Dad could have possibly gotten me for a present, I popped open the box's lid and pulled out the object inside it. It was a small framed photograph. It showed Grandfather, still wearing his trick shot costume, but with the mask removed, holding a small baby in his arms, a proud smile on his face, while a young boy who looked to be about 6 stood next to him, also smiling, though he looked a little jealous of the baby in Grandfather's arms. "See that?" said Dad. "It's a picture we took of you, your grandfather, and Thomas not long after you were born. Told your grandfather to take off the stupid costume, but he insisted on wearing it. So this picture is about 16 years old, the same age as you." "I've never seen this picture before," I said, looking up at Dad again. "Where did you find it?" "I didn't," said Dad. He put an arm around Mom's shoulder. "It was your mom here who found it in the attic while going through old family photo. I had forgotten about it, even though I was the one who had taken the picture all the way back then." "It's great," I said, looking down at the picture again. "Grandfather looks really young in this picture. But he was in his 40s or something around then, wasn't he?" "Late 50s, actually," said Dad. "But yeah, he always did look young, even despite the stress of being a superhero aging him a lot." I looked at the picture again. I spotted the trick shot watch on Grandfather's wrist. It was angled in such a way that the face of the watch faced the camera, though that looked more like coincidence than deliberate. Looking at Thomas, I was amazed at how he looked so much like Grandfather even back then, when he was just 6. As nice as the picture was, I couldn't help but feel sad when I looked at it. Both Grandfather and Thomas were gone. Granted, Grandfather at least was still alive, but Thomas wasn't. It reminded me of how small our family had gotten over the years. Yes, I did have some aunts and cousins in other parts of the state, but they all lived far away from each other, and we rarely saw them except for around Christmas, Thanksgiving, and the like. Seeing this picture and then looking at Mom and Dad reminded me of how big our family had once been. There was no way I could bring Thomas back to life. I could save Grandfather, possibly, but even then, there was no guarantee that I would be able to do that anytime soon. But one thing was certain. I was going to use the trick shot watch to take down the Injectors and Icon, no matter the cost. For the rest of the day, I mostly napped, except at dinner time when the ice cream cake came out of the freezer. Then Mom, Dad, and I had cake together and just generally had a good time. It was a nice distraction from all of the bad stuff that had happened recently. Plus, the cake was absolutely delicious, the best cake I had had in a long time. I made a mental note to get another cake just like this as soon as the next excuse for eating cake came up. I slept surprisingly well that night, but my dreams were weird. They mostly consisted me of running and hiding inside the tool shed, but what I was running from changed constantly. Sometimes it was the Injectors, sometimes it was Christina, and sometimes it was just a large, shadowy mass that would definitely hurt me if I let it get me. Such dreams would have scared me normally, but I didn't find them quite as scary as I should have. Maybe it was because I had the power of trick shot now, so if any of those people came after me, I could defend myself. Except for the mysterious shadowy mass, That was just weird. In any case, when I got up the next morning, I found that my phone was full of texts from my friend Kyle. Apparently, he had been texting me all day yesterday, trying to find out if I was okay or not after I ran out of the bus with the Injectors chasing me down. I was about to text him back, but then decided that Kyle probably deserved to actually hear my voice, rather than just read a simple text from me saying I was okay. So I dialed Kyle's number and waited for him to answer his phone. I didn't have to wait long. 2 beeps, and then I heard Kyle's slightly breathless voice on the other end saying, "Jack, is that you? Did you get my texts?" "Yeah, I did," I said, nodding as I sat up in my bed and yawned. "All 400 of them. I'm perfectly fine. The Injectors didn't hurt me or anything." "Whew," said Kyle. "I really thought you were a goner when I saw those 3 Injector guys leave the bus to get you. And when I heard that 4 more Injectors joined them, well, I wasn't exactly making plans to go to your funeral, but I figured I should prepare just to be safe." I chuckled. "Nah, I don't think I'm going to die anytime soon. It was very scary, though." "I bet," said Kyle. "I'm amazed you survived it all, by the way. I've always heard that whenever the Injectors come after you, that you never survive. They don't take prisoners." "And they wouldn't have taken me prisoner, either, if I hadn't been saved," I said. "I got lucky." "Yeah, but who defended you anyway?" said Kyle. "Some of the other kids at school are saying Bug Bite appeared out of nowhere and saved you, but others are saying it was an entirely new superhero no one has ever seen before. I haven't been able to find out who is right." I paused to think about what I should tell Kyle. It was too risky to tell him that I had saved myself as Trickshot, because even my parents didn't know about my identity as Trickshot yet. Even if Kyle was my friend, I wasn't sure I was ready to involve him in this just yet. So I said, "I'm not sure. I was inside the tool shed the entire time, and there weren't any windows or anything that I could use to look outside. Whoever saved me probably was a super of some kind, though, because there's no way an ordinary person could have taken down 7 Injectors by himself like that." "Well, I heard rumors that Trickshot did it," said Kyle, "but that doesn't make sense, of course, because your granddad retired 10 years ago, so there's no way it could be Trickshot, unless someone somehow got their hands on his costume again or made their own." Yeah, right," I said, nodding. "Whoever it was, I'm grateful they came to my rescue. There's no way I could have saved myself. That's for sure." "Right," said Kyle. "Everyone at school is talking about you, but I'm the first person to actually talk to you since then, I think. Even Deborah has been worried about you." My heart skipped a beat. "Deborah? You mean Deborah Ackerman?" "Yeah, your girlfriend," said Kyle teasingly. "Not that I'm surprised, given how nice she is, but I thought I would mention it anyway." I rolled my eyes. Debbie Ackerman, one of my classmates, was not my girlfriend, but I had had a crush on her for a while now and had been trying to muster up the courage to ask her out. Kyle knew how I felt about her, which he teased me about whenever he got the chance because that was just the kind of friend he was. "Maybe you should ask her out when you come back to school on Monday," Kyle suggested. "You're 16 now, which I'm sure makes you a man in some foreign country somewhere in the world, and men ask out the women they want." "Says the guy who's never asked out a girl in his life," I said. "I'm not telling you to fight and die for some great cause here," said Kyle. "Just saying that now's your time, dude. Go for it." I shifted uncomfortably on my bed. "I'll go for it when I feel like it. Anyway, let's change the subject. Like we always do whenever I tell you to ask Debbie out." "This is important," I said. "Remember when that one Injector, Rodriguez, claimed that one of us had something that belonged to the Injectors? Something they were trying to take back?" "Of course I remember that," said Kyle. "What about it?" "Because I want to know if you found out who might have had what the Injectors wanted," I said. "Did anyone admit to stealing from them or anything?" "Of course not," said Kyle. "Do you really think that anyone would admit out loud that they outright stole something from the Injectors? That would be like walking onto Times Square and announcing to everyone that you stole $1 million from the mafia. No one is that desperate to get put on the hit list of the Injectors, not even the emo kids who talk about how much life sucks all the time." "But someone has to have something that belonged to the Injectors, right?" I said. "It doesn't seem likely that the Injectors would bother hijacking a school bus unless they had good reason to." "I don't know," said Kyle. "I haven't gone around demanding that the other kids empty their backpacks or lockers so I can see if they have anything that might have belonged to the Injectors at some point. Personally, I think the Injectors just made that up as an excuse to rob us." "But it doesn't really fit with how the Injectors work," I said. "I've never heard of them robbing or hijacking a school bus before. My theory is that one of the other students has or had power, but who I can't say." "I bet it was Ryan Bond," said Kyle. He seems like the kind of guy who would steal from a group as dangerous as the Injectors. Plus, he's friends with Robbie, who we know actually did try to buy power from the Injectors. Can't argue with that, I said. Ryan is a jerk, and jerks like him are more likely to do something stupid like that than other people. Still, I don't want to jump to any conclusions, especially without any evidence. Okay, said Kyle. Anyway, do you want to hang out today? I didn't get to pay for your lunch yesterday at school, so maybe we can grab lunch or go see a movie. I heard the newest White Leopard movie is supposed to be pretty good. I opened my mouth to say sure, but then I glanced at the trickshot watch, which sat on the desk next to my bed, and remembered that I had promised to train with TWT. Sorry, Kyle, but I won't be able to hang out with you today. I've got a lot of chores to do today and stuff, so I can't hang out with you right now. Oh, okay, said Kyle, who sounded somewhat disappointed. Well, maybe we can hang out on Sunday then, if you're not too busy. Yeah, Sunday sounds good, I said. Anyway, see you later. I've got to go. I ended the call. At the same time, the trickshot watch flashed and TW stood before me again, his arms folded behind his back and a curious expression on his face. Was that your friend Kyle? Said TW. I nodded as I put my phone back on my desk. Yeah, he was just calling to make sure I was okay, because he hadn't heard from me since yesterday. What a good friend he is, said TW. It reminds me of the friendship Gregory had with his fellow superhero, Jinx. The two of them always had each other's back, even though they worked in two different cities. I shrugged. Kyle and I have known each other since first grade. We'd do anything for each other. TW's eyes narrowed. You didn't tell him about the watch, did you? I shook my head. No, I didn't. And I don't have any plans to at the moment, because I'm not sure I want to rope him into this stuff yet. Good, said TW. Gregory made it very clear that he didn't want knowledge of the trickshot watch to trickle down into the general population yet. He doesn't want you or your family to become targets for the Injectors or any other group out there who might wish you harm. Like those Icon guys you mentioned, right? I said. TW nodded. Precisely. Icon is as ruthless as the Injectors, if not more so. That is why it is so important that you train today and learn how to control your powers. Yawning, I glanced at the clock on my phone and said, but it's so early. Do I have to start training now? Not right away, said TW, shaking his head, but it is imperative that you get started as soon as possible. Because you don't have school today, that means you have all day to train and learn how to use your new powers. Right? I said as I stretched my arms. But where are we going to train? I'm not supposed to let anyone see me transform or use my powers just yet. Where should we go? I already have a place picked out for this purpose, said TW. I spent last night running a search on the internet for any abandoned places in or near Rumsfeld, which you might be able to use for training. I located one such location and have downloaded its address to your phone, as well as the quickest route there via bike. I picked up my phone and went to my map app and saw that there was indeed a location that I hadn't looked up myself, Warehouse 19, on the east side of Rumsfeld. I looked up at TW. What is Warehouse 19? According to my research, Warehouse 19 was once owned by the Lockmiller Corporation 20 years ago, said TW. It was abandoned after a fire, however, and has remained locked up and closed to the public ever since. There aren't any security guards or homeless people living there, right? I said as I lowered my phone. From what I have researched, the place is totally abandoned, said TW. Even homeless people don't go anywhere near it. Apparently, there is a rumor among the homeless people of Rumsfeld that Warehouse 19 is home to an evil fire spirit that burns anyone who tries to enter and claim the place. I raised an eyebrow. And you decided that would be a great place to train? Well, why wouldn't it? Said TW. It is large with plenty of space for you to use your powers freely, and no one lives in or near it, which means that it is unlikely that someone will accidentally stumble upon you while you're training. Plus, as we all know, spirits don't actually exist. It is just an urban legend created by superstitious individuals who don't understand science. I frowned. Says the advanced hologram which can grant me superpowers whenever I put on the costume you made. TW crossed his arms. I didn't know you were so superstitious, Jack. Gregory thought you weren't. I'm just joking, I said, waving at TW dismissively. Anyway, let me get dressed and have breakfast, and we can head down there. Best not to train on an empty stomach, after all. The end of the Legacy Superhero Season 1, Episode 3, A Hero Emerges.